Let's review the Xiphosura longsword gloves from Kvetun Armoury. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now in this video we're going to see these being used by a couple of my club mates, and they're going to be giving their own review as well. So I'm going to try and keep this as concise as possible. So for anyone who doesn't know, the quest to find the perfect longsword gloves in HEMA, or in fact gloves for anything, is a long and ongoing quest, and something which has to have compromises in it. So fundamentally, when you're making gloves for longsword, and these would be the gloves you would also use if you were doing HEMA, something like poleaxe, or indeed if you were doing Asian martial arts with you know, Japanese sword simulators or whatever else. In other words, very protective gloves that need to be able to stand up to a lot of abuse from powerful, hard-hitting weapons and that don't have any handguard built onto them. There is always the balance, I guess, between protection and mobility, and you know, different companies and different practitioners, different fencers have gone in different directions. Some people prefer to have more mobility, you could say, at the cost of protection, and some people go full protection at the cost of mobility. Now, first up, fundamentally, there are two types of gloves that we use for sparring like this. They're either going to be mittens like this, or they are going to be fingered gloves like this. And generally speaking, a mitten is going to protect your digits, your fingers and your thumb, well, not necessarily your thumb, but your fingers, better than something which has individual fingers on it. And you know, there are things like the Pro Gauntlet, and there's these St. Marks, which I don't think are in production anymore, and which have been very protective for fingered gloves, but overall they don't have such a good per capita safety record at preventing broken fingers as mittens do. Now, that's not to say that people don't get broken fingers in mitten gauntlets as well, they do, and also there is variation between mitten gauntlets. So these are the Xiphosura, which we're going to look at in more specific detail in a second. The most famous other mitten gauntlets that have been out there and widely used have been the Spez Heavies, which were a benchmark for a long time. I'll come back to those in a minute. Also the Sparring glove, made in Poland, as are the Spez incidentally. And then more recently there is a glove which has come out of Superior Fencing as well, which I'll be reviewing in the near future, but that's not going to feature anymore in this video. Overall, come back to the Spez Heavies. For a long time, a lot of people championed the virtues of the Spez Heavies because for a long time they were the most protective HEMA longsword glove on the market, and some people have used them with arming swords, sword and buckler and stuff like that as well. I think some people have even jammed these in a saber hilt, but I have to say these won't fit in any saber hilt I've got. So for a long time these were the benchmark for protectiveness, if not mobility. However, they had various flaws to them, and I should point out this is an older generation of sparring glove, ones that I've probably, of Spez Heavies, ones that I've had, I think, for in the region of, I don't know, like 5 years or something like that. So they're fairly old ones, and the design has been a bit updated and refined since then. But the main flaws of them were, number one, you've got this big shell which reduces mobility and dexterity, should we say. Also, in terms of protectiveness, they're not ideal because the end of the thumb was exposed, and when you were holding it you could get hit in the end of the thumb and get the thumb broken. The thumb protector was rather big here, and lots of people did not like this cuff and made modifications to it. However, that all being said, for a long time various people, including my mate Dave Rawlings at London Longsword Academy, extolled the virtues of these as very protective gloves for longsword, and they were always, I think anyway, regarded as more protective than the sparring gloves, even if the sparring gloves gave greater dexterity. Again, it's all about balances, okay? That's a theme that should underlie all reviews of gloves. Very often, if you want to gain dexterity, mobility, lightness, you give up protection. These were very protective. However, the new Xiphosura gloves actually, in my view, beat the Spez Heavies on both points. They are both more mobile, more dexterous, and more protective, okay? So let's quickly look at how they are more protective. Well, first of all, the cuff is far better designed, far more cleverly designed, and you've got hard plates all the way around here with an underlying wrist plate underneath there. So the wrist and the beginning of the forearm is extremely well protective. Next up, the thumb. It has overlapping, it's on elastic as well as stitched to the glove. You have overlapping thumb plates around here, which provide much more complete protection to the thumb, encasing the thumb. They're also more streamlined, and you have an enclosed thumb tip protector. Another part of the thumb that often gets neglected is the inside of the thumb here. I've actually received a very painful hit right there on the muscle that numbed my hand for about a week. But this is actually padded, so not only is it thrust resistant, but it's material, but it's also got padding in it here. And that doesn't interfere with your grip. We just grip a longsword here. You'll notice that that pad of the thumb is exposed, but not actually against the sword. So the thumb's more protective, the wrist is more protective. In terms of the main plates over the fingers, I would say they're roughly equivalent, okay? There is an advantage to the Xiphosura, and I'll get to that in a second, but in terms of protectiveness, I would place the Xiphosura and the Spez Heavy on a par as far as the fingers are concerned. Now the next thing is mobility. So I would say that this is overall more protective than the Spez Heavy, but in terms of mobility, I would say it's got better mobility. The thumb is better designed. You can move the thumb around more easily. And in terms of these plates, it has more laminations. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've actually got easy opening and closing here. The only thing we did find in use, and you'll see this in a second, the only thing we did find in use is that when you pull down on the fingers here, the hand sort of bulges a bit there. And what we did find is that can create an opening in there, depending on what you're doing with the longsword. But if you're in the process of slightly opening and closing the hand, those fingers can be exposed outside of the plate. So one piece of constructive feedback is that we did think there would be some mileage in actually having a stronger kind of strap or section across the end there, so that the fingers couldn't come below the level of the shell, so they'd stay inside the shell. So I'm not only going to talk about positives here, I'm not here to just sell you these gloves. I do, also I should mention, disclosure, I do work with Kvetun, okay, so I develop products with Kvetun. However, I've not been involved in the development of this product at all. I don't get anything out of the sales of these or anything like that. So I don't consider I'm biased, I'm being honest. I think that there needs to be a strap across the end there to prevent the fingers dipping down and coming out. And also I think that would help the plates stay closer to the fingers, and might even aid dexterity as well. One thing you have to be aware of with these fully enclosed thumbs, I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of them, but they are the most protective option. And these are very much inspired by Bohurt or HMB Battle of the Nations type full contact armoured fighting, basically. Where when you're gripping something where the end of your thumb is exposed, the only way to make it safe is to fully encase it. What you must be aware of if you've never used these gloves before is that that does affect your interaction with the sword slightly. And if you're used to doing things where you place the thumb against the blade, I can't really feel the blade with the tip of my thumb, although with the fabric softening up, it's possible I might be able to in the future. So you must be aware of the fact that, again, it's always a balance between protection and mobility. So fully encasing that does lose you a little bit of tactile feeling. Right, one of the main great things about the Xiphosura gloves is that they have devised a cuff that is both extremely protective and extremely flexible and mobile, okay? And the way they've done that, if I just bring this up to the camera, the way they've done that is with these overlapping plates that go around here that are able to expand on stretchy elastic, and underneath there is a wrist plate here. So your actual wrist joint is essentially fully protected by a U-shaped plate, but then the cuff is not a solid piece. Now a lot of other gloves, including sparring gloves for example, by standard have one plate. It's not always plastic, it can sometimes be leather or neoprene type stuff, but they have one plate that goes around, and that does mean that the cuff itself, except for the lacing on the inside, doesn't really expand and contract, whereas these can, I mean, if I pull them out, look, you can see how big they can go there. They literally don't impede my wrist in any way. Now, while I'm trying to look for a one-handed sword, I've got so many swords. Here's a one-handed sword, right. While I personally wouldn't use these for one-handed sword, for my own preferences, I think a lot of people will. And one thing you have to note is this cuff does not impede you moving the wrist around at all. You can do moulinets from the wrist like you would do with the sabre or bolognese side sword without any impeding whatsoever. So, and they're extremely protective as well, and they're lightly padded underneath. So I would consider this wrist and this cuff just about the best in the business. One specific other minor criticism I have, or at least something to be aware of, is that while the wrists offer great mobility, they are not slimline, they are not small. So when you're holding your longsword, if you cross the wrists over, it's not a huge problem. These are smaller than some cuffs out there, and I would say definitely smaller than the old Spez Heavies. However, they are bigger and bulkier than sparring glove, for example. So for example, if you're doing a twerk or zerch, however you want to say it, round here, the wrists by definition will cross some of the time, and you'll notice that if I've got a reasonably long hilt, it's really actually not any problem for me at all. Okay, but if you do have a shorter hilt, then just be aware of the fact that these aren't the slimmest cuffs in the world, and they will be clashing against each other. So for example, I'm not supposed to show you this yet because this is a sword which is coming in the future, so I'll be very careful to show you. But you'll notice this has a shorter hilt and these wrists do collide somewhat. Anyway, that's another thing to bear in mind. They are not the smallest wrists, but they are very mobile and they are extremely protective. In terms of a lobster tail like mitten, this is pretty much the best in the business. It's got the most articulations and seems the most flexible of all, and it's as protective as the old beloved Spez Heavies that lots of people loved. I never really particularly got on with them, but lots of people loved them. And the thumb, I would say, is, if not the most flexible, it's one of the most protective. I would say the most protective, and it is also pretty damned flexible considering that. And in terms of the inside as well, suede inside, good grip, good manipulation. I just think maybe there needs to be a strap across the top there. So let's go over now to SG1, my fencing class. This was recorded a week or so ago. These are my mates Cosmas and Gary putting these gloves through their paces, and let's see what they think. So we're here at SG1 Schola Gladiatoria in West London, Ealing. Cosmas and Gary have just been trying out the new Xiphosura gloves from Kvetun. I should point out, Gary was actually using an earlier version, a prototype, and Cosmas was using the latest version. There's some differences in the thumb and various other things. So what did you guys think about them?
Well, at first I felt very strangely about them. They're very different than what I'm used to feeling in the sparring gloves.
What do you normally wear?
Sparring gloves.
Sparring gloves, okay.
But they are very breathable, easy to get in and out of inside. I did find the pull strap very, very helpful.
Okay.
And, well, they're kind of a little bit stiffer and less forgiving in where they move, but it turned out
and these are new, so so they're probably breaking.
All the hard shell is what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
But what ended up is actually they move very well, and I barely noticed I was wearing them, even though normally at first they felt very natural to me, but then they worked just fine.
So you quite like them then?
Yeah, actually they're quite good. I would recommend them to people.
And they feel pretty protective, yeah?
Yeah, I think they would take hits quite well. The only thing I noticed is there's a soft part right on the inside of the wrist. It doesn't complete hard, but most gloves don't have that anyways. But that's
so
the only thing.
The earlier one. Oh no, maybe it didn't actually. But I know.
Like it does, but
yeah, they changed some stuff to do with the wrist because the early ones were very difficult to get on and off, and these are much easier to get on and off.
I also like this fabric. I felt like
it's suede, isn't it?
It had
suede
good
on the
grip
inside.
to it.
Yeah. So. I agree, and the earlier ones were more of a like shiny leather, and they had terrible grip. These have got pretty good grip. What did you think, Gareth?
I mean, so I wear sparring gloves just like Cos, although mine have an hourglass cuff, and I noticed that this is a lot easier to basically cross the hands.
Yeah,
that's a me problem.
Because they're kind of collapsible wrists.
Yeah.
So because they're not one continuous cuff, I think that's actually a really good solution to wrist protection. So I really like that, and I really like how you've got this wrist lame underneath here, which the cuff overlaps. So I felt protection.
I felt pretty good about these. They're at least as protective as mine. We weren't hitting each other's hands particularly hard, and I don't think there's a lot of hand hits going on, but I imagine even a direct on hit to the thumb, probably fine. It's got enough of a lip that the ridge here is going to catch most things.
Yeah.
So unless you took a thrust directly to the palm, I think you're going to be okay with these, I think.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so basically positive for both of you. Yeah. Good mobility.
Surprisingly positive, yeah.
I think they're very good protection. I think they're probably the most protective longsword gloves I've ever had.
Yeah.
I'm not very practiced at longsword these days, so that's why I thought that it's important to throw them on you guys and let some other people test them out. Thanks a lot. I think it's really useful feedback, and thanks to Cosmos and Gary.
Great, thanks,
cheers, guys. So thanks again to Cosmos and Gary for testing these on camera and agreeing to be filmed and give their views. I currently think that the Xiphosura gloves for mitten gloves are just about the most protective gloves that I've seen. As you can see, I've got quite a few here. They're just about the most protective mitten gauntlets you can get for HEMA longsword, and they're relatively good dexterity. In my opinion, they're better than the Spez Heavies, and they're better than other competitors that are on the market. And so I think they've got great mobility, particularly the wrist and the cuff. But you know, for a mitten, the fingers and the thumb are okay as well. Do also bear in mind that if you do want greater dexterity, then that is always going to come at the cost of protectiveness. And so the other gloves out there, like the Pro Gauntlet, or you know, various other finger gloves like these old St. Mark's and things like that, you do stand a larger chance of getting broken fingers or thumbs in them, or certainly fingers if not thumbs, and you are more likely to get injuries. However, you know, that's the trade-off you have to decide. There's also a question of durability here, and so far I have found that the Kvetun Xiphosura gloves are very durable. They don't have, I mean, they've got a couple of scratches on them from use, but apart from that, they seem really solidly made. And not naming any names, but there are some quite highly regarded HEMA gloves out there that do the job until they fall apart, and some of them are falling apart way quicker than we'd really want them to, whereas these Xiphosura gloves seem pretty much bomb-proof as any other gloves I've ever held or tested anyway. I hope this has been a useful review for you. If you want super ultra protection and pretty decent dexterity, the Xiphosura gloves are probably a good choice for you. And also bear in mind that Kvetun are a really good company for listening to user feedback and upgrading and updating their products. So this is like the third generation of Xiphosura glove that I've had already since prototype stage. I had a prototype one, and they have developed in that time. And with users like you out there, they will probably be making new developments and new little changes and improving these all the way along. Whereas some manufacturers, they just make a thing and it stays the same for years, or decades in some cases. Anyway, so check those out. Link below down to Kvetun's website. You will also be able to buy these through certain suppliers in your own countries. If you don't want to order directly from Kvetun, you'll find that lots of places around the world will stock these. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I hope to see you back on the channel really soon. Make sure you click that like button, and if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. See you back soon. Cheers, folks.